Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Good morning. Welcome to the final Transport Committee of this mayoral period. Can I welcome members, officers and the public to today's meeting of the Transport Committee. The main item for discussion today is future trends in London transport. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched off or on silent mode. Good advice. Can I start by asking our clerk, Paul Goodchild, if any apologies have been received, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies today from Assembly Member McCartney and Assembly Member Moema, and Assembly Member Berry is running a bit late, so she'll be here shortly.
Lovely, thank you. So can we note the recommendations set out in item 2 and ask if members have any other interests to declare? Thank you. The minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 23rd of January 2024 to be signed by me as a correct record.
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from previous meetings of the Transport Committee?
Noted.
Good. Can we note the action taken by the chairman of the committee under delegated authority in conjunction with the deputy chair and party group leaders, namely to agree a letter to Tricia Hayes CB to confirm her appointment as chair of the London Travel Watch Board following consultation with the Secretary of State for Transport, and a letter to the Mayor of London on personal security issues on London Transport's network.
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to note the response from the Mayor of London to its letter on river services?
Yep, noted.
Lovely. Right, that's all out the way. Now we move on to our main item of business, which is a question and answer session on the future trends in London transport. I would like to welcome our guests. We have Thomas Ableman, Director of Strategy and Innovation Transport for London. Welcome. We will shortly be having Robert Garbutt, who is Chief Executive Officer of Drone Major Group. We have here with us also Hirra Adeogun, Co-Director Campaigns and Impact Possible Limited, UK. Have we got Dr. Yeah, we have Dr. Kyounga Park, Chief Director of Metropolitan and Urban Transport Research, Korea Transport Institute, and she is joining us via Zoom. Very welcome. And we also have Philippe Crist, Senior Advisor on Innovation and Foresight International Transport Forum, also joining us online. Good morning to you all. So I'd like to thank you. That's it. If we can now get to our question and answer session, I will be opening the batting, as they say. And so question 1 is to all our guests, but we'll start with those in the chamber. Start with Hirra. What do you consider to be the biggest future opportunity in transport in the next 5 to 15 years, and how do you think this opportunity will impact transport in London? Hirra. Okay. There you go.
So I am from Possible, and we're a climate charity. And we're coming at this knowing that demand is increasing for motor traffic when we know that it needs to be decreasing for the sake of the planet. So where we're coming from is from a demand reduction perspective, and without regulation, without intervention, trends on that are just increasing. So we would like to see much more investment in public transport, in cycling infrastructure, in particular, and including within that, the electrification of e-bikes and e-scooters. I've seen some things around autonomous vehicles. I think we have concerns around the trust, particularly in recent days. We've seen how unless you get the public on board with trusting these sorts of vehicles, we're going to have a real problem. We've seen an increase in e-scooters and e-bikes on our roads. Some people consider that to be a safety concern. But we think with the right kind of infrastructure, it will actually be a positive thing. We would like to see e-bike subsidies rolled out so that people can invest in these. At the moment, they're still very expensive, to encourage people to move away from their cars. We've seen, there are concerns around, the obvious thing is electric vehicles and charging infrastructure for that. There is, it takes a long time to charge these vehicles. We don't want to see a like-for-like replacement of EVs because that's not going to help us to meet our climate targets. And I think affordability has to be a key thing. We're in a cost of living crisis, and London has one of the most expensive transport systems in the world. So we need to rethink our congestion charging. I know that a paper recently came out looking at this, and I think I would really encourage London to be at the forefront of this and begin trials into how this would work. The other thing that we've seen is that our cars are getting bigger and bigger, and our cities are quite small, so we need to tax our SUVs more, because a city is not the place where you need to be riding around in these tanks, quite frankly. Yeah, I will stop there.
Thank you. Thomas.
Yeah, I'll give two answers to that. The first is, what is the top priority in that time period? And for me, the only answer to that can be decarbonisation and addressing the climate crisis. So there are a whole load of things we have to do, but at a global level, our ambition to reach net zero by 2030, as part of the UK's ambition to reach net zero by 2050, has to be the single driving priority. That's a question of priorities, but you asked what would happen. And I think we just have to approach that question with a huge dose of humility. If we look back 15 years, at that point, the term micromobility was only coined by Horace Dediu in California 6 years ago. Apps did not yet exist. The first iPhone had not come out. Uber was years off even being founded. Autonomous vehicles were a DARPA research project funded by the American government. Tesla was trying to persuade people that electric cars were even viable. Almost everything we currently think of in terms of transport innovation simply didn't exist and wasn't even envisaged 15 years ago. Therefore, the key challenge here is not to try to predict the future, but to be agile and responsive, assess quickly, and then determine what we do as that future emerges.
That is interesting. Thank you. Perhaps we could go to our other guests. We've got Philippe.
Yes, thank you. So we've already heard many things that are important and that are consequential for London. I will point out that on many of those, the ITF, this body, the International Transport Forum that I represent, works with 66 countries around the world trying to address these same questions. And for some of those topics that have just come up, we have actually published research and guidance on the question of avoiding a like-for-like replacement model with electric vehicles. We have published 2 reports on that. I will welcome you, and I'll circulate the descriptions of those reports afterwards, on the need to have a more agile and Foresight focused approach to the future rather than a forecast approach to the future, to think about moving away from predicting and providing to deciding and providing. These are also key areas that we advise our governments on. We've also published some work that look at how countries are doing that around the world. But you've asked the specific question, what is the key development that is going forward? And on top of some that have already been identified, I would just point out that we are in an era where we have little clarity on what the future will bring. But we do understand what cities provide in these uncertain times, and what cities like London, urban areas like the Greater London area do provide is a mix of both randomness, chaos, that leads to serendipity, that creates creation, that creates value, that creates the strength of cities that have existed for millennia, and at the same time the need to improve efficiency. Efficiency is a loaded term, and in the past, in transport and in cities, we've tended to focus on the efficiency of the use of time by individuals. And what that has meant for transport policy is that we focused on delivering travel time savings. And that is because individuals face a scarcity of time, but cities have another type of scarcity that they must always contend with, and that is a scarcity of space. And so we have done a lot of work trying to understand how can cities, how can transport authorities, how can governments better use the space that they have available in cities? And one of the key findings from that work, and I think it is one of the issues that London is already grappling with and will be grappling with, is how to better address the consumption of space by the different ways in which people are moving around in the cities. Now, in the past, we've, at least in the last 100 years, we focused on getting people around in several types of vehicles, buses, but in particular private automobiles, which are not a very efficient use of that scarce space. So one of the messages and one of the areas where we believe any city, including London, will have to think about quite hard in the future is how to reallocate that scarce space to the most efficient use in getting people around. And I know that there will be other questions on how that might be happening and what advice we can give on that, so I'll wait for those questions. But I think that is one of the key challenges. How can we think about efficiency in the use of space in cities, in the use of mobility space, of transport space, and then what are the policies that will align with those requirements and also align with the kinds of challenges that we are facing, that we've already heard of, a safety challenge and a climate challenge as well.
Thank you. That's very interesting. Dr. Park.
Yes, hi. In my view, the most significant impact on urban transport is in the coming period will be the transition to eco-friendly vehicle represented by the electric vehicles to achieve carbon neutrality, and expansion of app-based personalized transport services such as DRT, and the development of new transport technologies such as autonomous driving or UAM, etc. In addition, as the metropolitan area expanded, there is a need to explore express services that connect key points in the city at a faster speed. And then I have some doubt about localized regional development. In a post-corona era, some people say that we need, say, 15-minute cities. But I don't think there is a clear answer to the question whether such urban development can be efficient in large cities like London, where job and population or culture, all activities are concentrated in that area. Okay.
Thank you. I've noticed now that Robert Garbutt, you've joined us. Thank you very much. No worries, no worries. Everyone else on the panel has answered the question, what do you consider to be the biggest future opportunity in transport in the next 5 to 15 years? How do you think this opportunity will impact transport for London? But also my next question, and I'd like to roll the two together, is what projects or challenges is your organisation currently working on which relate to the future of transport? Do you want me to repeat that, or you got all that? Yeah.
I need to put the microphone on.
Okay, I'm on. Do apologise. So in terms of the future of transport, I just want to separate the transport of humans from the transport of cargo slightly. My expertise is that I'm Chief Executive of Drone Major Group. So we are obviously focused on robotics and autonomous systems, either on land, sea, air, or anything else. So my focus is on that. So when we're talking about the transportation of humans, I believe very strongly that for the next, at least for the next 15 to 25 years, that will be piloted, which takes it out of the realms of being drone. The evolution of the helicopter is quite clear, that there are massive opportunities for helicopter operators to move into utilizing either eVTOL or VTOL, other VTOL technologies, multi-rotor technologies that are slightly greener than the helicopters of which I'm an engineer. And so there is a huge opportunity there to increase mobility of humans, but it is not, in my mind, a massive opportunity for the masses, simply because as soon as you get to the point where you're carrying passengers, the certification costs are in the hundreds of millions of pounds per aircraft. The lifespan of these aircraft are quite short, and therefore, you're talking about transporting rich people from the airport to a hotel. So that's where we are with the eVTOL market. However, if we talk about the transportation of cargo, I believe that the future of transportation, there are huge opportunities for the use of robotics and autonomous systems. Keith, you and I have talked many times over the years, and I've had conversations with the Thames Estuary Growth Board regarding the use of the Thames, which I used to live on. I used to look down the Thames and wonder at how empty it was as this massive corridor of power going into London, and we are absolutely not utilising it. Still, we seem to think that building a port somewhere in Kent, which creates huge amounts of traffic and a bottleneck, is the best way to go for transporting goods up the Thames. We don't really realise that actually utilising either autonomous or semi-autonomous maritime systems coupled with air systems to take cargo from brownfield sites, either in Kent or in London, up and down the Thames, constantly, every day, all day, would be a really good thing. And I know that that would be a massive move to remove some of the stress and the strain that we have on our roads in London. We could use it as a major route in and out of London, which is exactly what it used to be used for, and now it's not. We seem to have everything on the road, or at a lesser extent on the rail. So there are huge, huge opportunities for the use of robotics and autonomous systems in that respect. There are also opportunities for their use in the hub and spoke model for logistics, so from hub to depot to sub-depot. And I just want to say right away that the idea of delivering parcels to people's houses is utter nonsense by drone. Utter nonsense. And I will explain in depth to anyone who wants to know why that is the case. There are last mile models that work, and that could be delivering hospital to hospital. It could be delivering to key locations such as airports or manufacturing facilities, fixed locations that don't move. But delivering to every single household in the kingdom does not work and will not work for three reasons. It is not commercially viable, it is not safe, and it is not socially acceptable. So drones have a huge opportunity to change the face of transport for London. It is a great city. We should utilise it more, and the only frustration I have is it's taking too long to do. In terms of the projects that we're working on, so one of the huge challenges that the drone industry has is solving two things. It's the air risk and the ground risks. The air risk is if something is in the air, and we're talking specifically about unmanned air systems now, not necessarily maritime and ground, which have lower risks. The air risk is don't hit anything in the air. So don't impact other aircraft, don't impact other drones. And the ground risk is if it falls out of the sky, it shouldn't hurt anyone. Now, the problem is that manufacturers, certainly specifically of smaller UAS who believe that we're going to be delivering your rubber gloves from Amazon to your house, that we should be able to fly these things anywhere. Surely, we fly them every day, they're great, aren't they? However, the amount that you would need to put in the air to service that would be in the tens or hundreds of thousands, even for a city like London, which statistically means you're going to have 3 falling out of the sky every day, and it only takes one person to die as a result of that, and you've got no industry whatsoever. So we need an infrastructure. We need to understand what the routes are that these things are going to fly. So if I go back to the model that we discussed earlier, a little bit about moving them down the Thames with autonomous maritime vessels with aircraft coming on and off, you would have set routes to the brownfield sites which are mapped and have what's called a digital tethered route. So it's got multiple layers of navigation, multiple layers of communication, and a safety assurance system which is DO 1785C certified, which means it's as safe as if a pilot was sitting on board the thing. If we can do that, then we can absolutely assure that if anything goes wrong, no matter what it is with that aircraft, it will always land safely. That's what we need, and that is what DroneMater is doing now for a large critical national infrastructure organisation that I'm not allowed to tell you what it is. But it goes choo-choo.
Just on that, Robert, I use the hubs where they deliver near to where I live, but not actually where I live, because I'm never at home, and actually I find them much more convenient 24 hours a day. Would it be, you think, practical for those drones to deliver to the hub, and then the people at the petrol station, whoever, can unload them, load up the hubs and send them back? That would be a fixed route?
Yes, if you can find a fixed route that's safe, and you can put a digital tethered route infrastructure in. And now an infrastructure, don't get scared by the term. It's mostly digital, but it has some on-the-ground beacons. So there is some expense to doing that, which is why you can't deliver to every household. So yes, of course, delivering to, maybe not every single petrol station, because there may be petrol stations that you can't find a safe route to, or you just can't get enough beacons out there, or it's simply just too high risk to get there. But certainly having hubs. The analogy that I use is if you've got a large residential area, such as, I used to live in Greenwich, there on the river, and I used to go to the concierge to get my parcels because that's the only place that parcels could be delivered. Absolutely 100%, nothing stopping a large aircraft, if there was a safe route, which of course there was up the Thames, to deliver the parcels there by air. Nothing wrong with that. Or in fact, by the Thames. A combination of the two.
Thank you, that's very interesting. So if I can then go to the other members, I'll start with you, Thomas. So what projects or challenges is your organisation currently working on which relate to future transport, if I can ask you that?
Well, to an extent, I could read out the TfL business plan, so I won't do that. I'll focus on the theme I outlined earlier around agility and humility. So there's two things. One is trying to understand what the future will look like, and then being ready to react to that. So in terms of trying to understand what the future will look like, we're constantly forecasting and reforecasting, and one of the very sensible approaches that we've adopted in recent years is to prioritise scenario planning, because we don't know what the future will be. And at the moment, the two key scenarios that we're plotting against are the level of economic growth, because we don't know how fast London, never mind the UK, will recover, and secondly, this question about whether or not people stay local. We've seen recently there has been a growing trend that people are roughly doing the same length of journeys that they used to do, but they're doing fewer of them, and people are spending proportionately more of their week in their local area, on average. Not every person, but on average. So will that trend continue? Will it accelerate as people, we heard about 15-minute cities as a concept earlier, as that takes off, or will cities return to the kind of more of the agglomeration model that has been traditional? So the first is just trying to understand the options for the future. The second is then responding to things as they emerge. So we have a team, our new mobility team, that is constantly looking proactively at the emerging transport and mobility market, looking at new startups as they emerge, understanding whether those innovations have benefits for London or are threats to what we're trying to achieve. And we assess those against Policy 23 of the Mayor's Transport Strategy, which sets out a list of criteria by which we should assess these things. So, do they help complement the public transport network? Are they accessible and inclusive? Do they help us address the climate challenge? We heard about space earlier. Are they efficient in their use of space? And from that, we can then form a view. So at the moment, for example, we're running a trial of rental e-scooters, which we, as TfL, are awarding the contract for, and setting standards for, and making sure that we understand what needs to be done to make them safe and to understand what impact they can have on the wider transport network. We're monitoring the dockless e-bike market, which has emerged very quickly and has a whole series of potential opportunities, but is also causing a whole series of very significant issues in terms of street space accessibility and particularly issues for people with reduced mobility. We're also looking at the emergence of autonomous vehicles, both supervising actual real-life trials. There are tests of these vehicles taking place in London at the moment, but also working very closely with the Department for Transport on the autonomous vehicle legislation that's currently going through Parliament. But above all, we're out there in the marketplace talking to startups, talking to venture capitalists, talking to organisations that work with those organisations to make sure we understand what is coming up. And we have a matrix of about 40 different types of technology that may or may not emerge in future years.
Would you be able to share that matrix with us, do you think?
I'm sure we'll be able to.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Hirra.
Right, so there's a lot of work that we do in this area, and I'm broadly going to split them up into the first section being we strongly believe that there shouldn't be more roads being built or, roads being opened to cars. So one of the things we've been working on is Hammersmith Bridge. That is an old crumbling Victorian bridge. There are hundreds of old Victorian crumbling bridges across the country. They're incredibly expensive to fix. They were never intended for the level of traffic that we see going across them recently. And we've put together an alternative proposal, which is walking, cycling, and using driverless lightweight pods. That would mean you don't need to do these expensive repairs to the bridge because the pods are lightweight enough to get people over. With the intention of those with mobility issues being able to use those, we hope that they would be connected with the TfL bus system, and therefore, it would work like the hopper fare. You're not being charged twice to use the pod to get over the bridge. But essentially, the bridge has been closed for several years now. That is the status quo as things stand. And we think the only problem is people with mobility issues can't get over it. So how do you fix that? We think that that can be a blueprint for lots of other Victorian bridges across the country, if that happened there. There's, of course, Silvertown Tunnel, which is being... we know that drilling's happened. We would like to see an alternative in which we expand the DLR and we have more bus lanes and cycle lanes. That should be what the tunnel is for, not for more cars. The second group of things we've been looking at are people who currently rely on motor vehicles and what they're going to do when it comes to a just transition and how we can support them. So one of our campaigns is called Hot Wheels. We've all seen an increase in food delivery riders on London streets, and this is looking at the intersection of unsafe work and unsafe streets. We're very much making the case that cycle lanes are working lanes for working people, and therefore the access to cycle lanes is a safety at work issue for these food delivery riders. But also a lot of them at the moment are using fossil fuels to power their mopeds and their bikes. We would like to see incentives being put in place so that they can more easily get access to e-bikes. We know there's an air pollution problem, and that's one of them. We're also doing some work with cabbies. We're putting together a campaign called Cabbies for the Climate. Cabbies are often portrayed as anti-traffic reduction, but we know that there are lots of cabbies out there who support the electrification of the fleet. And essentially, this is about the future of their work and what does that look like. In a world in which we have reduced traffic reduction, we hope that this will mean that cabbies are used a lot more, in fact, and so it would be profitable for them to go down this route. We're also doing a bit of work on rural care workers. Now, the key thing there is, obviously, London is not rural, but it's who are the types of people who absolutely need to rely on their cars and what can we do to support them. So we've been looking into getting a social leasing scheme, as they've done in France, for those who absolutely need their cars and to get them to more quickly adopt EVs. And then finally, the things we've been talking about is adaptation, because we're at that point where, you know, temperatures are increasing. We will see increasing health problems because of that. There are people who will be more vulnerable because of that. We need to see more urban greening. We've been doing lots of work on parklets and the need for adaptation when it comes to our cities. And then finally, we've been working on going car free, and that is particularly helping regular drivers move away from their cars and helping them with free access to bikes, access to training. And what we've seen is that with that support, most people recognize that they can get about way more easily without their cars than they ever thought. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Park. Dr. Park, would you like to... Would you like me to repeat the question, or are you...
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, so I understand your question is what project and challenges is my organization currently working on? Is it correct?
Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
Yeah. So I would like to introduce what we are doing now. So the institute I'm working on is Korean Transport Institute, and this institute covered almost all areas of transport. There are 8 sectors in this institute. One is Mobility Transformation Research Center. They conduct research on autonomous driving services, integrated mobility service technology, and national policy for mobility transformation. And then we have another sector is a so-called Metropolitan Urban Transport Research Center, and that is where I work. And it deals with the improvement of public transport services in metropolitan areas. So we want to improve bus services or metro demand responsive services, or we are working on that some transport measures when we build new towns around the Seoul metropolitan area, and we are working on them. And in Korea, there is a problem with local rural area. The population declines so rapidly, so we want to come up with some way to improve bus services to cope with the decline in rural population. And then we have division of road transportation, and they deal with underground highway project or digitalization of road system. And then we have railway department as well, and they working on GTX, that means Metropolitan Rapid Transit. And then they working on the national project or national plan for like a 5-year terms national plan to build railway networks. So the Korean government want to transform the whole transportation to carbon neutral system. So that the railway is a kind of a leader of this kind of transport system. And we have another research sector. They working on the UAM, and then UAM is in the very beginning stage of developing technology, but we our members involved in national R&D project, and then we develop some legislations or safety issue, or we want to develop some solutions for safety issues, etc. And then the other sector I want to introduce is we have 2 another department. One is for logistics, and then some part of them they developed new technology of urban logistics. So they introduced some eco-friendly last mile delivery services. or robot delivery systems, and then they want to come up with some platform system to collect all data from the delivery services and then share those data to the other private companies to improve their delivery services. And the last department is we call the National Database Transport Database Center, and then they develop transport database from the survey or big data, which are collected from the travel trajectory. When people use travel card, we can collect every single data from them, and then we can investigate how people move and then how their travel pattern will affect on our transport system. So that is really good data to give us some many deep insight of the whole country's mobility. So that's what we are working on then. And then I think that everything is quite important. So I cannot choose a few of them. But anyway, that is what we have done now.
Thank you very much. Philippe.
I'm going to, as Professor Park has said, we have a long list of activities that we work on, and so I can give you a high-level overview, but I'll try to pick out some of the projects that are perhaps more specific or more helpful for London and the Greater London area. So the ITF, the International Transport Forum at the OECD, works in all domains of all modes of transport. Like we've heard in Korea as well. We work in many ways. We undertake some high-level, micro and meso-level modeling of transport around the world. So looking at demand, projecting future demand, looking at existing patterns, and we base that on a very, very robust set of transport models that are linking urban activity, freight activity, logistics activity at the urban area, at the urban level, maritime activity, aviation activity, rail activity, intercity travel. All these are linked in a suite of models that we use to help develop scenarios to think about and to test the impacts of interventions that our member countries might put into place, or that subnational governments, for example, the case of London, might also want to put into place. So we have that capacity to play with different types of scenarios and different types of interventions. We also do policy analysis. We look at specific issues and bring together experts on those issues and try to find some consensus of where the state of the art lies on addressing some of these issues. We have a statistics division that collects regular statistics. We're looking there as well in the ways in which the delivery of statistical information can be improved, like, as we've just heard, through the use of new novel data sources, different types of data sets than national administrations or local administrations have used in the past. We also provide advice on some of the benefits and some of the challenges that arise with the use of these new types of data, including, for example, trajectory data or any kind of data that's going to be collected from handheld devices, positioning data. And we point out some of the biases that can occur with that. In terms of the domains, we work on digitalization, on decarbonization, on connectivity. We work on universal access, and on safety, security, and health. And in each of those areas, we have very specific projects that we do. Now, I mentioned some of the work that we do at the high level, which is to think about how to help our members think about the future and anticipate the future, and to put in place a future-ready stance, and how that is changing with what we can see as trends that are occurring both at the international, national, and even in some cases at the urban level. So that is a big chunk of our work on foresight and improving the capacity for foresight within our ministries. In the digitalization space, that's both looking at what can we say are already some of the impacts of digitalization. And that's going to be assessing the uptake of app-based services, looking at new delivery models for services, including in public transport, looking at how digitalization changes cost structures in the industry and within public transport in particular. Looking at new types of technologies that we already see being deployed, automated vehicles, new service delivery models, as I said, but that include automated vehicles, so public transport using automated vehicles. In terms of decarbonizing transport, we do a lot of work trying to assess the global effects of different policies, the uptake of electrification, different models for the uptake of electrification, the requirements and needs for charging infrastructure. We do that at the international level. We have also done some studies at the city level, simulation-based studies that provide plausible guidance on what level of charging would be necessary for different models of EV uptake. In particular, looking at what was mentioned earlier, the difference between a like-for-like EV replacement model where large electric vehicles are replacing large fossil fuel cars versus the kind of charging needs and electricity needs that you would see from a broader uptake of a wider range of electric vehicles, small vehicles, up to the kind of vehicles that we currently see on our road. And what we see there is that there are significant efficiencies that can be gained, about 30% less energy use, about 30% more space available, and 30% less charging infrastructure required in public space. So there are some very specific outputs that are helpful to guide urban policy. In the digitalization space, we also focus on the governance of data, of mobility data, and the governance of new technology or new digital technologies by transport authorities. There we point out that there are great efficiencies, again, that can be gained from the digital joining of different services. So not just mobility as a service, but finding ways in which different services can be joined to provide seamless intermodal trips for both passengers, but also for freight. One of the things we point out there, and that we've done a significant amount of work at the national, and in some cases at the regional level, is what does a mobility data governance framework look like for an urban area? What does it look like for a nation? And how do you develop an ecosystem where new services can be developed under a common set of rules that include some minimum data sharing by all operators and openness of data sets and the mechanisms whereby that's achieved by having APIs that all mobility operators present in a space that's regulated by an authority must install and make open to other vetted actors. So there's some very specific guidance on that. We also look, of course, at safety. That is the prime concern when we think about transport, safety and efficiency. And we look at the ways in which in our countries we have seen the best safety outcomes delivered, and that follows the gold standard safe system approach. This approach assumes based on reality that people will make mistakes and that the outcomes of those mistakes should not be death or serious injury. And so it starts not just looking at how we can improve safety, but really how can we make the entire system safe. And that guides our work, for example, on automated vehicle safety, because similarly, we recognize that automated vehicles may act in ways that are not anticipated, and that when this happens, again, the failure should be not a loss of human life or serious injury. I'll give a quick example on that that illustrates our work in this area.
Hello, Philippe.
Yep.
Yeah, I am going to have to stop
okay,
you there.
that was a broad question, and so you're getting a broad answer.
It's very kind. It's very interesting, actually, but probably a little bit more depth than we're looking for. But thank you very much indeed. Assemblymember Garbutt, you wanted to come in. Can I ask you to be very brief? We are running quite late now.
Yeah, I think I can incorporate it into a later question that I have.
That's very kind of you. All right, so we're now going to move on to the next section. So, is it very quick one?
Well, yes. We've heard a lot about reducing road space, introduction of buses and all the rest of it. But how do we maintain the mobility of those people who have the greatest difficulty travelling at the moment? And I'm thinking about disabled people, those who perhaps have a visual impairment. And perhaps, Miss Adeogun, you can...
Just asking that for Hina. Yeah.
Yeah, so we always say that traffic reduction helps those who have no other alternative but to use their car, because it means that there are fewer cars on the road, means that they're not stuck in congestion. We did a report called Nobody Left Behind, in which we worked with disabled people's organisations, and we interviewed basically disabled people about their experiences on the transport service, etc. The thing to note is that there are lots of different types of disabilities. There is not one kind of disabled person. What works for one person isn't going to work for another. There is a kind of tension there. But we strongly believe that those who have no other alternative absolutely should still have access to their cars and be able to get about in their cars. Ideally, we would like to see a transition to EVs, and therefore we would like to see subsidies to make it easier for disabled people who do rely on their cars to transition to EVs. Yeah, that's...
It's just that many disabled people I've talked to feel like they've been left out of the consultation period, and as though transport innovations are designed for a certain average demographic of London, rather than taking into consideration those who have the most difficulty getting around our city. How do we resolve that?
I mean, it's a really difficult situation because there are so many disabled people who are actually locked out of mobility because of the current system that prioritises car use. You know, most disabled people, based on the stats, don't drive because of their disability. And so it is a hard one to resolve, but I think with genuine consultation, by prioritising the voices of those most marginalised in our communities, that is one way of going about it.
That's why I wanted to hear you say prioritising those people with the greatest challenges for mobility. Thank you very much.
Philippe, I see you've indicated. If it's very quick, please.
It's very brief. I'll just point out that the use of digital technologies does exclude a number of people. It is a fallacy to believe that digital natives will not face this as they get older. We have seen evidence that even those that are quite comfortable using digital systems at a certain age will become less comfortable. So these are very important points that will always have to be taken into account, not just looking at the proficiency with which people are using technologies now. Doesn't mean they will not be challenged by the use of those very same technologies later in life.
Thank you, that's very useful. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm now going to move on to Assembly Member Pigeon.
Okay, looking at transport innovations, Thomas, I'm going to address the bulk of my questions to you. What are the opportunities and challenges, really, from the current structure of London's transport network in terms of ease of innovation in this space?
I mean, I think London has a number of advantages. We have as a city, we have a very strong ecosystem of innovators. We have a really strong university sector. We have a strong startup sector. At early stages, we have a strong venture capital sector. So it is comparatively easy for innovations to emerge here. And if you look back at innovations that have now matured, such as digital innovation, City Mapper, businesses like that, which have grown and become global, a lot of those started in London. So we have certain strengths. Coming back to the point that was being made a few moments ago, actually, I think one of the strengths of the approach that we take in Policy 23 of the MTS is we assess innovation on quite a broad set of criteria, and one of those is accessibility, and that's one of the most important. And that does mean that we're not always going to be the people who are diving into new things first. We're going to be watching and learning and understanding before we do so, because we've got a very clear set of outcomes that we're trying to achieve for London. We're trying to achieve 80% mode share by public transport and active travel by 2041, Vision Zero and Net Zero. Some transport innovations help us in that journey. Others are, and I think the point that was made a moment ago, some of them are designed more narrowly, and we've got to be absolutely clear that they achieve our goals before we adopt them as part of London's transport network.
No, that's helpful, and it's good to know that it's a clear policy position rather than rushing into some of these things which everyone thinks are all new and shiny, and actually some of them are not. You talked earlier about the e-bikes and e-scooters on our streets, the e-scooter rental trial, which TfL is managing. Do you think these modes of transport really are sustainable and here to stay? What's your take on whether these are effectively the next big mobility trend, or is there something else that's coming down the road?
On whether there's something else coming down the road, pardon the unintentional pun.
It's hard in transport not to.
There are so many opportunities. I don't know. As we said earlier, almost certainly, and we just need to be very alert to that. In terms of those modes specifically, we're still assessing the e-scooter trial. The e-scooter trial now runs until May 2026. Our number one goal through this trial has been to understand whether these can be a safe mode of transport, almost before we do anything else.
Yes.
And we have therefore put in place very strict safety regulations for the e-scooter operators that are participating in the trial, which go significantly beyond those mandated by government. We put in place initially a lower speed limit, which you can then nudge up. We put in place the requirement that the speed limit is halved for your first journey. We put in place the requirement to have education as part of your first journey through the app before the vehicle is unlocked, and a whole bunch of others. And what we've seen is that the trial has been safe.
And it's also the design of the vehicle.
Absolutely, the design of the vehicle.
The wider wheels and all that. I mean, really
absolutely crucial. And you've not seen that in the wider private market, which I would love to see government legislate. And we saw in the Queen's speech in 2022 proposals brought forward to legalise the wider private e-scooter market. Personally, I think that would be the right thing to do because people are buying these. Therefore, we need to make sure that there are retail standards to make sure they are safe for people. But I think we have proved that they can be safe. If you look at the e-bike market, that I think is potentially very exciting. It broadens the potential scope of active travel. I think one of the questions early on was, is this active travel? And I think what we've learned is actually yes, because people use them to go longer distances. So if you look at a bicycle, a pedal bike.
E-bike is. I'm not sure about an e-scooter.
No, e-bike,
just
absolutely.
Standing on it.
Absolutely, I moved on to e-bikes.
Okay, just clarifying that.
Yeah, an e-bike is used for longer distances than a pedal bike. So a pedal bike is a more energy efficient option than walking, but you go further. An e-bike is a more energy efficient in terms of your personal use of energy than pedal bike, but you go further. So actually we have proved that people do tend to use similar amounts of energy. They are an active travel mode. Therefore they have a really exciting role to play in helping us achieve that 80% mode share. The challenge, of course, is that there is a significant problem with the way the market is structured at the moment. We have a very serious issue with street clutter's not the right word, because that actually creates significant accessibility issues for people with reduced mobility and with visual impairment. And we would like to see that resolved. And that was also meant to be coming forward from the Queen's speech in 2022, and so far hasn't. And we would really like to see those regulations brought into place so that we can have something that, A, addresses those problems, and B, is a comprehensible, structured, sensible, London-wide scheme. Because at the moment you have something rather chaotic. You have different operators in different boroughs operating to different standards with different parking regulations, all addressed through a tangle of MOUs and contracts, which, if you're a potential user, isn't massively comprehensible. So we've got kind of the worst of all worlds, where that market is underperforming in terms of its potential as a transport mode, but over impacting on the streetscape, and we'd like to see that changed.
Yeah, and we have basically seen local authorities playing catch up in this whole space, haven't we? Because regulation hasn't caught up with the innovation. How can you effectively regulate innovation in this area?
Innovation always has this tendency to run ahead of regulation, and that's been seen not just in transport but across the board. That's why we're keen to keep an eye on the market very early, to try and assess very early in order to understand what it is that regulation needs to do, and then to work as closely as possible, not just with DFT but with our colleagues. So we've been working closely with the Urban Transport Group,
and the boroughs,
which is the group of other major transport authorities in the United Kingdom, on what the future regulatory model for this needs to be, which is why we were able in 2021, 2022 to go to government to say this is the regulatory model that we need to make these work on our streets. And I'd just really like to see that legislation brought forward so that it actually happens, because we can assess relatively quickly if we're watching closely. The biggest challenge is actually just parliamentary time to get these things done.
Yeah. And are there any cities that you've seen globally that manage this well, or is it still watch this space?
I mean, we watch very closely what different cities are doing. Some cities like Berlin have got mandatory parking in the centre, but not on the outskirts. Paris has obviously taken a very different approach to e-scooters and to e-bikes. I think it's there's an emerging story. One of the things that we in London did, which I think was the right thing to do, was to not, as some cities did, dive straight into the e-scooter and the micromobility market very quickly in a rather chaotic way. We actually did let others go first, learn from them, and then put in place our model. And as we've seen with the e-scooter trial, where we have been given the powers, we've been able to make that work as a test of the mobility mode without causing the challenges for the urban streetscape.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we do need to move on. We are running quite a bit late. No, sorry, Assembly Member Baker.
Sorry, those went a little bit quicker than I was expecting. We're still on questions about transport innovation, and my next question is to Dr. Park. Thanks for your outline of many transport innovations that are taking place at the moment in South Korea. Just wondering about the structure of delivering those innovations. You talked about the government's plan for rail, and you also talked about working with private logistics companies to share data so you could plan better. So how are cities in South Korea enabling this innovation solutions, and how much does it involve partnership with central government and other stakeholders like private industry?
I would like to answer to the second question first. Actually, the first question is quite difficult to answer. Anyway, so there is some clear partnership between the government and the private sectors. For example, that big data we collected from the travel card trajectory, and then the company who collect or operating the travel card system is a private company, but the company is supported by Seoul City. So there is some contract. I think there's some contract that they have to open the data to public, and the Korean central government, they establish one public center who plays a role of collecting that big data and managing and operating and provide to the public. And then once we request the data for some purpose of such as research or developing policy, and then they have to provide the data to the one. So in the case, there's some strong partnership between government and private sector, and there is some public organization who is in charge of that managing the big data system. So that is a kind of the partnership, I have to say. And then the other thing is, I think there is a strong top-down process in Korea. So once government make a master plan for development railway systems, such like GTX, and then there is some implementation plan to support those master plan. So, and then we have like a year basis budget plan as well. And the other thing is, so that is one side of, that is the government side. And the other thing is we have so-called pre-feasibility study process that is a kind of gate to managing the government budget for the transport infrastructure investment, and then that pre-feasibility service is quite strong. So once we passed that survey, that means we have a kind of system to examine that benefit and cost analysis should be nearby, like 1 point. And once the project is over, then certain level of benefit and cost ratio, then government should support, should provide some budget for this project, and it goes some process to build those kind of infrastructure. So that is another process of that. And the other thing is we have promoted participation of private sector, and then there is some highway and the railway, which is built by private companies and operated them, and then they have to return to the government in 30 years. So that is some system to let them get some revenue from the users, and that can be a kind of a very good private and public partnership, like a PPP project. So that is what we are doing, some kind of transport network innovation. And then the other thing is your first question is how are the cities enabling innovation transport solution? Is that I think there is actually some transport innovation is based on some technology using smartphone, and then as you know, in Korea we have very high penetration of smartphone, like more than 95% of people can use mobile phone or smartphone, etc. And then there are so many startups who are working on that, who are working on the development services, app-based transport services. So that this kind of circumstances to enable people to access those kind of innovative transport services. And the other thing is the Korean central government promotes that startup companies to develop the transport services. And then there is some like the last government, they promote they establish some policy goals to make this country as a smart city hub. So there is a national project to be like a pilot project to make some places, some towns to become a smart city. And then one major goal is make the mobility is more smarter, using that kind of app-based services.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much for all of your experience there. And just got a question for Thomas from TfL. Are you able to share any early insights from the innovation collaboration framework to address transport challenges? And in your view, what are the most pressing challenges that you'd like to see addressed to this initiative?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we can't say how it is working yet because it's still very new and it hasn't been used. Just for everyone's understanding, the Innovation Collaboration Framework is a new contract that we've recently signed, which attempts to address one of the big challenges of innovating in a public sector organisation, which is that if you co-create a solution to a problem with an organisation where there is no existing solution, so they've actually got to invest time and money and effort into creating that solution, you then have the problem that you need to go and procure that solution. And so you then write that down in a specification, and the person who's put all the time, money, effort and investment into it might not win. And so, of course, that's a huge disincentive to come up with new solutions, which is why you end up buying again and again and again and again the thing that you have previously bought. So that's not ideal. Equally, of course, the reason public sector procurement exists is to ensure that you don't simply choose your mates. So how do you get around this problem? What the ICF does is say, well, if we are in a world in which there is genuinely no existing solution, the market has not provided anything yet, then we have the opportunity to work with some innovators on a framework contract. Those innovators were procured openly to act as our innovation collaborators. We then work with those innovation collaborators to come up with the solution to the challenge, and we then can scale that challenge and already have procurement authority to scale the solution that they develop. So it's a new way of working. The two companies that won the first innovation collaboration framework places were Mercedes-Benz and Sopra. So what we are now doing is going around TfL to say what are the key challenges where we have no solution at the moment, and looking to our ICF partners to identify which of them match their skill set, because clearly, working with a company like Mercedes-Benz, you have all the benefits of their digital expertise. There's a whole bunch of thinking that automotive manufacturers do, which actually I'd love to see brought into the world of a public transport authority, because they think about things very differently. They think about data, they think about consumer experience, they think about design and engineering very differently. Sopra, big systems integrator, European experience, have developed a whole bunch of different solutions for transport authorities around Europe. Therefore, they have got a very broad skills base within their organisation. So at the moment, we're trying to work out what the key problems that meet their skills base are, and then we will be putting those problem statements to them. And then there'll be a kind of funnel process, because not everything that goes into the start of that process will result in a working innovation at the end of it. So it's a 4-year contract. We will see in 4 years how useful it has been. I'd love to see us either extending it or running a new contract in 4 years' time, potentially with more innovators in the framework. But it's very early days. It's literally only just been signed.
So just want to press you, and you can refer back to your previous answer, but I know you're asking, obviously not yourself, but asking people within TfL what the most pressing challenges they like to see that go out to that innovation framework. But what do you think the most pressing challenges are?
The most, as I said in answer to the question earlier, the most pressing challenge we have overall as TfL and as a society is the climate crisis. So if there's new ways we can solve that, then
that's quite a big problem, though. I'm assuming you'd probably have something slightly more specific to give to them.
There's going to be a whole bunch of individual, very specific problem statements that emerge from the business.
Yeah.
We don't have that list at the moment, and it's not. My role is as a facilitator of innovation to the business.
I'm sure you have views, though, but I won't press you any more for them from your role. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Right, so now move on to Assembly Member Paul.
I think all my questions are to you, Mr. Ableman. There's a few, not too many. Is it possible that TfL will move to a completely app-based ticketing service in the future?
I cannot envisage that happening. I can't envisage that happening for a whole bunch of reasons. We heard the point around digital exclusion earlier. I can't actually envisage what particular benefits that would generate. So, it's not something I can in any way visualise happening.
Thank you. That's very clear. And the only benefits I can see are data collection. However, TfL has said it's exploring the ideas about around dynamic ticket pricing. Perhaps we'll call it surge pricing. Can you update the committee on what discussions have taken place with regard to that?
Well, firstly, just to be clear, this isn't my specific area of the business. There obviously in my role, I have an interest in everything. So we've very recently started, as you know, the Off-Peak Friday trial, and that's a response to changing demand patterns. Again, I can't visualise a world of the kinds of surge pricing that you see from people like Uber, etc. It's not something that I can quite see working in a public transport environment. And I also would highlight that this is in response to changing demand patterns. Changing demand patterns have emerged from the pandemic, and those trends build on trends that were already being seen in terms of greater levels of home working, people spending more time in their local communities. But these are changes that, if you look at a pre-pandemic demand graph and a post-pandemic demand graph, the shapes of the graphs are very similar. You now have slightly lower peaks midweek, still only slightly lower peaks Monday to Friday, though lower than the 3 days in the middle, and roughly the same Saturday and Sunday. So we have seen some changes, and it's absolutely right that we think about how the pricing model and the pricing structure should reflect those changes. And Off-Peak Fridays is a way of testing one of those potential changes. But we're not in a fundamentally different landscape than we were. The shape of demand on public transport is very similar to the shape of demand on public transport pre-pandemic, and indeed historically.
You say that, but I mean, we've all been poring over figures about post-pandemic about the way in which the system is recovering. We have heard that there seems to be a lot more leisure travel and less commuter travel. Is that something that you can confirm or say it's rubbish?
And I think at weekends we've seen a faster recovery, which means the levels of leisure travel, we can assume that a higher proportion of weekend travel is leisure travel. Levels of use at weekends have recovered faster and are therefore much closer to where they were. Whereas on Fridays, for example, we're at about 73% against around 84% overall. So it's about 10% lower. But it's not like leisure travel has suddenly surged post-pandemic and business travel has collapsed post-pandemic. The week is still busier than the weekend, as has been the case on public transport for centuries.
Is TfL exploring other potential innovations in terms of pricing and customer network use?
The only thing I'm aware of is Off-Peak Fridays, which will be a 3-month trial and assessed in May, and then once we concluded in May and assessed post the end of the trial in May, and then whatever we do next will be informed by the result of that trial.
So are there people in TfL looking at pay per mile, for example?
No, pay per mile is not something that anyone is working on in TfL.
Okay. Are there opportunities to understand more about transport user travel patterns and intentions by moving to app-based services? I mean, will the data be of help?
I think one of the strengths of TfL, and this is a long-standing strength going back 20 years to the start of Oyster, is that we actually have very good understanding of customer travel patterns thanks to, first, the Oyster card system, contactless system, the Wi-Fi system made a contribution to that as well. Therefore, TfL has over multiple decades built up quite a strong competence in utilising multiple data sources to build an overall non-individualised, aggregated pattern of customer demand. And all sources of data welcome to do that as long as they're compliant with all data protection legislation and do not identify individuals, which they don't.
We talk about data. I mean, one of the things that TfL can be very proud of is that when it opened data, there's a bit of struggle getting them to open that data, I remember, but we got there in the end. And as a result of that open data, there's been some fantastic innovations have taken place on the back of that. But people will ask, what's the security of that data? When we have got so much information on individuals, how is that individual data protected?
I couldn't agree more. I think open data was something that TfL should be extremely proud of. And obviously, I wasn't part of TfL at that point, but I think open data was an innovation that then spawned multiple other innovations. We mentioned earlier around organisations like CityMapper, which had their origins in TfL's open data policy and then scaled globally. So I think open data has been a huge success. In terms of management of data, it's certainly not my area of TfL, but we are compliant with all the relevant guidance and policies, do rigorous data protection impact assessments, and whenever we do anything different. That is something that I'm not as close to as many of my colleagues, but I'm aware that we take extremely seriously.
Yes, I mean, nobody can deny the value of masses of data, but we have to allay the concerns of some citizens that they may be targeted. So I'm encouraged by what you said, I think. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Pigeon, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in. I'm pleased you said that you're not going to move to sort of complete app-based ticketing, and you can't see a world where that would happen for Transport for London. But digital exclusion is this huge issue, and London Travel Watch did a really good piece of work on this in the last year or so. And the survey work they did showed that 1 in 6 people in London say they're unable to buy a ticket as they can't use or don't have access to a smartphone. 1 in 5 Londoners say that they've paid more for travel, again, because they don't have access to sort of mobile apps and so on. And some of that might be thinking more about rail, I'm sure, when they answered that, than TfL, but still there are real issues there. What are you doing to ensure that those people don't end up having to pay more because they don't have access to the technology, or as our guest Philippe said earlier, at some point they may then stop having access to it, which I think is a really important point.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a hugely important point. I'm not aware of any changes that are envisaged that could cause that problem to change, cause that problem to increase. I'm not aware of anything that would change from the status quo in that regard.
So it's always going to be there that you want to make sure that everyone will have access to the same price ticket on the Transport for London network, at least.
Yeah, I'm certainly not aware of anything that's being planned that would change anything that we do at the moment in that regard.
No. Okay. Lovely. I'll leave it there then. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Garbutt.
So, morning, everybody. Moving on to talking about artificial intelligence. So, my background's in IT, so I suppose I'm naturally a bit resistant to the sort of vaporware hype cycle, which comes around quite frequently. But large language models do seem to be a genuine innovation rather than a sort of a hype. I'm just wondering whether, I suppose perhaps this is mainly to TfL, to the ITF, and maybe yourself, Robert. What, if any, applications do you think that kind of AI technology might have in transport? Or, is that something that TfL is looking at, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. It's certainly something that we are thinking about. I think every organisation on planet Earth is thinking about these questions at the moment. And there's a whole bunch of theoretical applications one could envisage. One can envisage, for example, it becoming a way in which we can help communicate with customers, communicate different routing in terms of disruption, that personalised travel experience, which can be really challenging when what the journey you intended to make isn't possible. Are there ways in which we can seamlessly provide highly comprehensive information to people? One can imagine a world in which it could assist with maintenance, both predictive and providing information to engineers. There's a world in which we could imagine it providing assistance to our people, providing assistance in developing reports or proposals. One can imagine, you could sit here and list endless different use cases.
Yes.
I think as I mentioned earlier, TfL will probably be a relatively slow mover, because I think that's the right thing to do. I think it's worth, Amara's law says that we tend to overestimate the impact of technologies in the short term and underestimate them in the long term. So I don't think we need to worry about taking our time to consider these matters, because I think we probably have more time than we think we have. That's what experience would tell us. But we also need to be aware that while there are, I think, potentially opportunities here, there are also potential risks. There is significant evidence that large language models have ingested the inherent biases of the societies in which they were created and can then regurgitate those biases. Now that is a really hard problem for the manufacturers of those systems to fix, given the way they are built. But it's something that we would not wish to then incorporate into solutions that either our people were using or our customers were using. So how could we address those issues before we adopted these technologies? In terms of what we are going to do, one, we are doing a horizon scan, so we're looking at the world, we are looking at what other organisations are doing, we're looking at the emerging market. This is what we do in the case of all similar innovations, so this is nothing particular to AI, but it's something that we're doing at the moment. And the other thing is we will be working towards some relatively small-scale trials and experiments and testing and learning, which is, again, what we would normally do in this situation.
Yeah, I suppose we saw with Gemini the heavy-handed results of trying to counterbalance one bias and creating some rather unfortunate results. And obviously the other big risk is this hallucination problem, which you didn't mention, but obviously, of course, is also the challenge. I don't know, sorry, Robert, were you reaching for your mic? Did you have something to
Just a very quick one, just to support Thomas. You know, AI is a buzzword which is used quite openly to describe things that have been in development of technology for many, many, many years, which is algorithmic analysis of data and use of data. So I don't think we should focus too much time on it, to be honest. It's part and parcel of the development of technology normally. Big data models have been around for a very, very long time. We're now sort of grappling with the technology that enables us to utilize that in a more effective way, and it will be a natural progression, but I don't think it's something that we need to focus on.
Yeah, it's basically a very complex form of statistical analysis, which is not a new thing. You're right. Sorry, who was waving? Philippe, yes. Did you have something to add on this question of AI and either LLM or something else?
Absolutely. Just to join what we've just heard, that when we look at our member countries, we see these three main policy areas in which public authorities are using AI. That is to improve policy, to improve operations, and to improve service delivery. What we can say is that the ways in which, or even the knowledge of the different types of AI systems that are being used by public authorities is quite low and often disjointed. So we have specific recommendations that lead to inventorying the use of AI by public authorities, by transport authorities, as well as by those contractors that they employ to deliver on their mandate. So it's not just within the government, it's also those entities that are linked to delivery of public policy mandates that can also use AI. So inventorying. The second thing is that most uses of AI are, in fact, the vast majority of uses of AI that we can already see are quite benign. Some have consequential risks that are linked to them. And so another key recommendation is that undergo standard risk assessment processes to ensure that your own use of AI is not risky and that the use of AI by contractors or the services that you procure using AI are also not posing significant risks. And the last thing is the knowledge base with which to address, assess, understand, and regulate AI is something that is often not very well developed yet in public agencies. So there has to be an AI awareness and skills plan put in place to ensure that not only the use of AI is something that is possible by public authorities, but the understanding the repercussions of the use of AI by regulated entities is also something that is up to par with the kind of risks that and opportunities that it can pose. I'll just be quickly remiss if I didn't mention on the subject of micromobility the work that we have done specifically looking at the safety of micromobility. We have just released an assessment of the safety of micromobility. And in particular e-scooters. I'll just say that there are safety challenges, but the shared use of e-scooters, the generalized risk of that is decreasing, that we can see across Europe. And the other thing is on the life cycle impact assessment, it is quite an environmentally friendly mode, but not as environmentally friendly as non-electric scootering and non-electric cycling. And it is e-scootering is not an active mode, so you lose all the health benefits there. But I can also send around links to those studies after this meeting.
Please, thank you, Philippe. Just on that final point about micromobility, that wasn't my question, but actually, if you could send those through, I think we'd really appreciate that. I'm seeing a lot of nodding along the panel here. That would be very useful. My final question was actually going to be about risk management, because as I suppose someone who's worked in IT, I always think about what it looks like when things go wrong rather than the wonderful possibilities it opens up. But I feel like we've probably covered that in your initial answer. So unless anybody has anything specific to add on managing risk, I think I'm finished.
Just
Robert.
a very, very quick one, and that is impressing on everyone the importance of developing standards in this area. Regulation is one thing, but without supporting standards, regulation can only go so far. So I know that this work is going on in joint ISO, IEC committees, but it will be a number of years before that is in place. So, and as we've seen in the drone industry, it's always the desire of the regulator to go way too far beyond what they should do, rather than leaning on standards. So we just need to make sure that balance is in place.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually, by the way, that standards lead to innovation. On which topic, actually, I've just been whispered in my ear that we're moving on to the next section, which I'm also starting, which is about autonomous vehicles. I think we're going to come on to autonomous sort of rail systems in a moment with my colleague, but first just thinking about road vehicles, autonomous cars, and I suppose also you hinged a bit about this earlier, Robert, autonomous freight systems of some sort. So perhaps starting with sort of passenger transport, and Thomas, what does the world look like for TfL, from TfL's point of view, obviously as a highways authority, looking at where that might take us and what that might mean?
To an extent, it is the answer I gave earlier, which is we assess using Policy 23. So we know what we're trying to achieve, and we look at these as they emerge and see if they're leading in that direction. I think, again, Amara's law, we overestimate in the short term and underestimate in the long term. So I don't think this is something that's going to happen incredibly quickly. And we've seen repeatedly Elon Musk making predictions of when this is going to see large-scale adoption, none of which have materialised. But that doesn't mean that this is not something we have to watch very carefully, not least because there's very large sums of money being invested in it. Therefore, even if we don't see in London level 5 autonomous vehicles driving around anytime soon, we are going to see significant changes in the control systems of cars. I think there's a number of things that are important. The first is we really do need to understand what the safety implications of these vehicles are. We've got a really comprehensive set of recommendations from the Law Commission after a 4-year study. But when looking at how safety should be judged, they didn't recommend what we would recommend, which is that we adopt a Vision Zero approach, saying that a autonomous vehicle should be safer than a human driver. There's a question as to whether that's actually going to have public acceptability. Do people treat computers and humans in the same way? And secondly, we should be targeting that they do not kill or injure people. That should be the standard. That is the standard we're adopting for other things. And I think we really need, I would really encourage providers of autonomous vehicles to provide more data than they're currently providing, so we can get under the skin of the safety claims, because there are a lot of claims around the fact that these vehicles will improve safety. But a lot of those claims are made on the basis of asserting the number of injuries or deaths that are currently caused by humans, typically based on studies from the US. Well, the US has a very different street environment to the UK. Their roads tend to be much less safe inherently. They've got wide roads, intersections, segregated pedestrians, higher speed limits, and therefore a lot of the deaths that are being theoretically saved by autonomous vehicles have already been designed out in the UK because we don't have Belmouth junctions. We've increased the number of 20-mile-an-hour speed limits. We've redesigned the way roads work. Therefore, are actually those safety benefits applicable to London? I'm not saying they're not. I just don't know that they are. We also really need to understand how they will be used. Obviously, we're trying to achieve 80% mode share by public transport and active travel. So we therefore want fewer unnecessary single occupancy vehicles. I really don't want to see London filled up with zero occupancy vehicles, which in theory is where this could land. So we want to understand it better. We're monitoring the trials that are happening closely. At the moment, there's only one trial taking place in London that I'm aware of, which is Wave, operating tests of deliveries with Ocado and Asda. But I suspect once the AV bill becomes the AV Act, we will see more trials in London. We have published guidance on the website. We would love it if those providers work with us, engage with us, talk to us, because we really do want to learn and understand. Policy 23 is our guide. Are these things going to help or hinder the achievements of London's goals? Because if they will help, then we want to be part of that. If they will hinder, we want to help the industry get to the place where they help instead.
Yeah, the short-term, long-term thing I think is correct. I think there's a big step between 3 and 4 and 5, and I think it won't be till we get to 5 that you see a transition, but then it could be very quick, but that might be, well, like nuclear fission, 20 years away for the last 50 years. Philippe, did you have anything to add on this question about what we might see in terms of autonomous passenger vehicles on UK roads, what that might mean?
I would just rejoin the fact that London roads, as opposed to UK roads, don't have a tremendous room for empty vehicles already. So I would also point out that our own work looking at the potential safety benefits of automated vehicles, road vehicles, is overstated in most cases, and for all the reasons that we've just heard, but also because some of the original data on which human involvement in fatal or significant injury road crashes was misinterpreted in some of the original documents that highlighted that figure of 90% of significantly severe road crashes or fatal road crashes were caused by human error. So that was an overstatement of that. The other thing that we must consider is risk shift. That is that most of these crashes that are occurring often involve risk profiles that most drivers don't display. So we're talking about younger men taking risky actions are a significant portion of the kind of fatal accident outcomes we see. So when we put in place an automated vehicle system, that means that drivers who are not otherwise risky drivers may be exposed to risky vehicle performance. That is less than a teenage man, but certainly more than perhaps a safe driver in their middle life. So the risk shift is an important issue to consider from an uptake perspective. And finally, public authorities at the regional and local level do not have the homologation authority that national governments do. So there is not much they can do about, except provide input into what vehicles are going to be homologated for use on public roads. However, they do control the road environment. And this is very important because in a typical case of risk, some would say a misguided case of understanding the risk of AVs, the trolley problem, you have a vehicle driving at 80 kilometers an hour or 50 kilometers an hour, and it has to make a choice between running over a grandmother or 3 children. What does it do? There is only a negative outcome in that, but that example misses the point that the vehicle is traveling too fast at 50 kilometers an hour. And in an urban environment like London, where these interactions are possible, then the public authority has the responsibility to de-risk the environment by decreasing the speed at which those vehicles are operating. And that is something that public authorities can already manage.
So in terms, I don't know whether you, Philippe, or anybody wants to sort of get an estimate of time scale of where, I mean, presumably that is just an unknown, which is why nobody's had a stab at time scale.
It is. The problem is, and everyone's right, I'm going to agree with everyone, the driverless vehicles are unquestionably safer providing every other vehicle on the road is driverless. As soon as you interact technology and humans together. So we are on a journey now of retraining drivers by making the vehicle more autonomous with the driver sitting in front of it. I personally recently purchased a very advanced EV, which is a joy to drive. It almost drives itself. So we are, over the next probably 20, 30, 40 years, going to see more and more of these high-tech vehicles that require a driver, on a personal level, and the vehicle will almost stop you doing those risky things over time. So on a personal level, that is where I think we're going. However, there is a place for autonomous vehicles, and I'm all about what is commercially viable. So working in airports, working in mines, anywhere that is commercial, where drivers are scarce, where roads aren't necessarily a problem, other drivers aren't a problem, that is where you will see the evolution of autonomous driverless systems. And then perhaps maybe in the future you may have a single lane system on motorways where autonomous cargo vehicles could be, thus freeing up some of those other lanes for other drivers. So because they, in a single lane on their own without interaction with other vehicles, they can be very, very effective, very cost effective, very commercially viable. But personal vehicles and driverless, it just seems to me is solving a problem that doesn't really exist.
Okay, so I sense scepticism about the idea of across the board. I don't know whether anybody. I think that probably. Oh, I apologise. Dr. Park, you wanted to come in. Sorry, I didn't see you waving over there. My apologies.
Oh, this is okay. My opinion is quite similar to Thomas. I think I agree with the autonomous driving technology will take a longer time to be widely used. However, it can be used kind of supplementary means to increase accessibility in underdeveloped area for passenger services. For example, it can be used the last mile service in some residential area where elder people live, or in some new development area where there is insufficient public transport services. So it is important to take some phased approach. So then I agree with that safety issue. So we should be very careful to apply these limited services in safe enough range, I think.
Thank you. Those last mile services you're talking about, are they on the road mixing with other vehicles, or are they in a sort of segregated autonomous lane or area? I've seen some trials, I think, in parts of the UK where you have small minibuses in a segregated area. Is that what you have in mind, Dr. Park?
I think that is why I mentioned we have to approach it in a step by step. So at the beginning stage, now if we implement autonomous vehicle services at present, then I think more separated lane should be safer than a mixed lane. And then, as you can see in the San Francisco cases, although technology is highly developed, then there is some accident, and then that kind of accident can go back to the past. So, but in 10 years, let's say, then we might be able to apply the autonomous vehicle service in mixed lane. So I think we need to make some very smart strategies to apply that autonomous services.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that was it from me. I don't see anybody else indicating, so thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Assemblymember Rogers.
Thanks, Chair. Back to drones. So, Robert, a question for yourself. I understand that for a few years you've had a partnership with the Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. So, interested in the insights that you might have gained from that partnership about deploying drone technology in cities, and what do you think the lessons might be for London based on that project?
Yeah, that project is now switched off because the Liverpool sort of lost control of its finances, essentially. But there are a lot of lessons to be learned, and the lessons are essentially that there is a huge desire to, and a huge need to increase efficiency and effectiveness of, certainly in the areas of security, surveillance, and certainly not necessarily in transport, but it's more sort of logistics, and security and surveillance. There are a number of areas, especially in a port city like Liverpool, where drone technology, or UAS, or air drone technology specifically, can be brought to bear. I think the lessons to learn are that, and we've heard it a number of times today, it's very easy to get excited about this new technology, but you have to look very, very carefully at its commercial viability and the value that it adds. And also balance that with the safety and certification and the costs of implementing something like this. So it should be really used to benefit society more than, to make it easier for somebody to go from A to B, if that makes sense. So as I say, the security and surveillance is a key area, certainly when working with the likes of the police and the fire brigade. Owning those services currently go out and buy their own unmanned air systems, which are very expensive and most of the time are sitting on a shelf, whereas actually a centralised service run by a local authority to provide those services to whoever needs them would be far more cost effective. We're currently working on a project now which is looking at how we could provide very, very small unmanned air systems to accompany lone females on the streets of London in certain areas where they are at high risk. By simply open an app, press a button, the air drone will be with you within seconds and monitor you for as long as it can, and then be replaced if necessary for as long as you feel at risk. Those sorts of applications that benefit society are really very, very useful. But it does require a lot of research and development and working in partnership with companies to develop technologies that aren't necessarily available off the shelf. You know, nobody is going out there to develop a solution to do that. It has to be worked with, with the local authority. And the biggest lesson we learnt in Liverpool is that all the desires and wishes of the local authorities, the police and the port, there are no single off-the-shelf system of systems available. So you have to work through an organisation like ourselves to bring a number of companies together to develop a system to meet the needs of the local authority. And I think that I would encourage that is definitely the way forward.
Yes, I suppose so much of this is emerging technology, isn't it? So you've got lots of companies working on individual systems that you need to bring together to actually apply to the needs of a city. And I guess what kind of applications do you see some of this technology having? I'm thinking, for example, there's a Finnish company called Kellu that manufactures unmanned airships that they use for infrastructure monitoring, as in rail infrastructure monitoring. They have extremely long endurance, so they're quite good at hovering over rails for ages, looking for rail defects and that sort of thing. Is that the kind of application you can see for technology?
The critical national infrastructure applications, which is rail, energy and road, are unquestionable. And putting in an infrastructure, I would question the use of airships in the UK. We have quite high winds. So they're not going to stay stationary at all. So, but having systems, the system that we are working with Network Rail right now is to develop the infrastructure along which any aircraft could fly absolutely safely and guaranteed. It's called assured flight digital tethering. Is designed purely for that, and we work also in discussions with a number of other critical national infrastructure companies to do that. The infrastructure is the key thing. It's never about the system that you use. The aircraft is almost irrelevant, really. It's how can you make it fly beyond visual line of sight safely, so that the CA will allow you to do that commercially. And at the moment in the UK, there are 0 beyond visual line of sight commercial operations. We will probably be the first in early 2025 with a digital tethered system which is being rolled out between now and October. So having that infrastructure, and that infrastructure applies to roads, it can apply to pipelines, it can apply to power lines. So that critical national infrastructure application is really, really important. But again, it's definitely not down to the aircraft. And that's the point that everyone sort of focuses on, oh, I've seen this great aircraft, we should use that. But then the whole system of systems around that, the infrastructure, the communications, the navigation, the assurance systems, there is a massive system of systems that you need around that in order to apply it, in the same way as you need a road to drive a car on.
Thank you very much. I can see Philippe indicating.
Unmute myself. We have done work as well on drones, and I would add one thing that is probably of direct relevance to London. That is, London, I'm not sure exactly what the case is, but in most cities around the world, cities don't regulate airspace, even sub 500 meter airspace. What they do regulate is land and buildings. And so going back to the point that was made earlier on the need to define how drones interface with the ground, is something that city authorities have a responsibility in helping shape. What is a drone port? What does that look like? Where can it be? What are the rules regulating its use? Those are all things that cities must be thinking about, must be engaged with. And so I would suggest that if London isn't already thinking of a drone port policy, it should be engaged in that and trying to define what will be those rules of the interface between the ground and the air. And I certainly join the views that were expressed earlier on how that's going to be a much more limited number of interfaces than a maximal number of interfaces.
Thank you for that. And I guess that... Robert,
Sorry, can I just quickly cut in there? The local authority doesn't regulate the airspace. The Civil Aviation Authority regulate the airspace. So absolutely, but local authorities should be engaging with Civil Aviation Authority. There is a concept called atypical environments, and an atypical environment is any airspace or any environment in which a manned system has no business being. So that is specifically around railway lines, power lines, and you could probably count that within certain areas within cities. So understanding that system is really important for a local authority, understanding how airspace is regulated. And this is the key problem. The technology is there, the will is there, the money is there, but the ability, it's nothing to do with the lack of regulations, it's to do with the unwillingness of the regulatory authority to accept the risk, and quite rightly so, of thousands of little drones flying around all over the space. So looking at what airspace is going to be used and what routes are going to be used and what infrastructure you need is absolutely critical to making this a commercial viable and a reality in the future. Otherwise, we're still going to be here in another 9 years' time dreaming about getting your rubber gloves delivered by Amazon.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it was a good few years ago there was the Amazon advert with Jeremy Clarkson, wasn't there? Which
I have to say, Amazon's got a lot to answer for. It's damaged the drone industry irreparably because it is nonsense for the reasons I've mentioned earlier. Is that in order to certify an aircraft, even a relatively small aircraft, to carry a load, to fly over people, you're talking about, at the moment, the aircraft that a company called Wing are using in America and trialling. Everything is a trial, right, at the moment, carrying up to 7 kilograms. They're 20 or 30,000 pounds each. Well, you can add a zero to that if you certify it. And that's the problem. And then it becomes, hang on, a 200,000 pound drone to carry 7 kilograms occasionally to someone's house. Yeah. It's not commercially viable. So, and as a result of that, because they're not certified, it's not safe, because you are then going to have, you have to have a safety factor, even if you meet the safety factor of helicopters, which is 1 accident in 10 to the minus 9. So that's a very, very small room for error, and the CA won't accept that for eVTOLs or drones. It'll have to be manned aviation, which is 1 minus 10, so it's even harder. So the certification process that you have to go through is incredibly expensive. One single VTOL with a lifespan of 5 years would cost 500 million euros to certify. So it becomes incredibly difficult to start flying thousands of these things around. Yeah. So we have to think bigger. We have to think infrastructure, digital and physical, so that we've got routes that are safe. So if it does fall out the sky, or in fact, let's say when one falls out the sky, it doesn't hurt anyone and it's not a problem. And railways and power lines and all of the other infrastructure that we have, and routes that can be safe along canals, along rivers. I'm going to go back to the Thames again. Perfect. And these are the areas that we should be looking at.
Thank you. And so we've moved on to this discussion around last mile deliveries effectively. So I can bring in Thomas. What's TfL's current thinking about the role that drones and also, should we say, autonomous vehicles might play in last mile deliveries?
Well, I've heard quite a convincing argument from the gentleman to my left. I mean, in terms of drones, we don't, as has just been said, we don't regulate airspace in London, so this is not something that is particularly within our remit. We're obviously talking to the CAA actively. We respond to all CAA consultations. And I think Robert has made it quite clear he thinks it's unlikely, if a proposal emerged that saw this being proposed at a serious and detailed level, we would engage very closely with that. It's not something that we are doing active policy work on. Probably the other last mile delivery approach that's being looked at is something like Starship, which is a small scale delivery box. That is something that is being trialled in other parts of London. We haven't trialled that in London. We are seeing what happens in other places, but it's not something we're actively looking at here.
Thank you. I think that's it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I'd like to now bring in Assemblymember Pigeon.
Lovely. I wanted to go back to the autonomous vehicles discussion, because I recall when we discussed this a few years ago, when we did a previous piece of work around this, the big issue was around who carries liability. And I was reading that in our briefing today that the 2023 automated vehicles bill is to ensure clear liability for the user. But when we discussed this before, what happens if an autonomous vehicle goes down a road, somebody steps out in front of it, they either hit that person or they move off to the whichever side and they hit a tree? And who then is responsible? Who is liable for that? Has any of that sort of detail been worked out yet? Because it seems to me that's one of the huge issues, ultimately, where liability sits.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Law Commission did a valiant job, and it's a really difficult area.
Yeah.
Because, as we said earlier, regulation tends to catch up innovation, and they want to try and get ahead of that, which makes sense. So they did a lot of thinking and have come up with this concept of user in charge and not user in charge. And I get why, and I can't come up with any sensible alternative, to be honest with you. But, I mean, the point Robert made earlier is absolutely right, that while the bill seeks to make quite a binary distinction, in reality what is happening is vehicles are becoming more autonomous.
Yes.
And one of the things that I'm concerned about and would like to understand more about is the safety implications when we have vehicles that are not officially not user in charge. So they are not, the driver has not handed over formal liability to the vehicle, but actually the vehicle is largely driving itself, and you have a user that hasn't had to do anything for a very long period of time. We are investing in technology on buses as an experiment to monitor bus drivers to make sure that they are alert. We have similar technology now on trams. I can't visualise that technology being deployed to cars. We have no evidence that there is a risk here, but equally, given experience, one of the biggest challenges we have on the underground network is around cognitive underload of drivers. I think we need to really urge the autonomous vehicle industry to help us understand the safety risks at each stage of the development. I get why the bill is drafted as it is, and I certainly can't come up with a better alternative at all. But this is new, it's not binary, and we really need to understand this better, and we're doing everything we can to try to understand it.
I think that to me is the huge risk in this space, understanding that, and ultimately I guess insurers and whatever will want to know ultimately if something happens who was liable and who's going to be paying out. Was it the person who was sitting there in an autonomous vehicle but at some point they were supposed to have taken control? Did they understand that? It's very complex. Robert, did you want to come in?
Yeah, just a very quick one. So I did a briefing for the senior investigators officers of the UK last year, which touched on an even more sort of slightly frightening fact, and that is that whether the driver is sitting in the vehicle in control of a semi-autonomous vehicle or whether the vehicle is autonomous, if the vehicle has an accident because the vehicle does something a bit strange, there's virtually nobody qualified to inspect the data, the massive quantity of data that is contained within the systems. The police are not qualified. They don't have the systems to connect to the vehicle. So you're at an accident, and if that accident involves another vehicle with a driver that is not autonomous, obviously he's going to blame the other car, and even if it has someone sitting in it and says the vehicle just did something weird, the investigation into that can only be conducted by the manufacturer. And the manufacturer is the person who desperately does not want to agree liability. So it is a huge issue, which, as Thomas has said, there are legal minds far better than mine grappling with this issue. But it is going to be some time, I think, before you can get vehicles driving with full legal coverage and insurance that you can afford. Sadly, we can't just get rid of all the vehicles and replace them with autonomous, because that would be the solution. But it's going to be a long time before we can get there, unless you have segregated lanes where the vehicle literally cannot move over and interact, or in areas like airports where there aren't other vehicles with drivers on, or if they are, they're fully trained and expecting strange behaviour.
Some of that is quite limited use, though, isn't it?
It's limited in a way. But if you look at the world that we live in, there are vast areas that could utilise autonomous vehicles very, very effectively. All manufacturing plants, all logistic areas, airports. It's vast. But I think driving on the roads of London with an autonomous vehicle that you're not in control of is possibly a long way away.
Yes, I think that's right. Let me just bring Philippe in, and then I'll come to you, Thomas, on this, and then I've got a couple of questions I'm going to pick up on climate change.
Yes, I will just point out that the Law Commission's work is really some of the most cutting-edge work that has taken place within our membership. And I think particularly we talked about the user in charge, no user in charge operator, but I think the concept of the authorized self-driving entity as having some responsibility in this is a clear way forward. And it is a complex topic. There are no easy answers, but clearly that trifecta of the entity that is responsible for the self-driving system, the no user in charge, and the user in charge are all parts of the answer. I will also point out that when it comes to the forensic ability to understand what has gone wrong, there is room in the future to require different coding practices for the AI system that is operating the self-driving function of the automobile. And those coding practices exist today. They're certainly not implemented by different manufacturers or different creators of self-driving systems. But what they do is create more explainable AI systems such that you understand what factors influence an outcome that the system carried out. It is something that for critical systems is being considered in a number of fora, and it is perhaps something that will make that forensic task easier in the future in terms of allocating liability. But that is a regulatory action that has to take place at the national level for that to be available to use by local authorities.
Lovely, thank you.
Must also be supported by standards.
Yes.
We should
absolutely,
always
absolutely.
talk about the regulator, because the regulator is one thing, but industry needs to set those standards so that regulators can use them.
Yeah, Thomas, you wanted just to come in on that?
Yeah, can I also just express a slight lack of overwhelming enthusiasm for the concept of remotely driven vehicles? Because actually, in some ways, that's an easier technological task. Car driving along the road with nobody in it, person driving it somewhere else. The Law Commission has also grappled with this challenge. And, again, we need to understand more. There's not much of this happening at the moment. When the AV bill passes, we may see more of it. But intuitively, it feels like all of the disbenefits we articulated earlier around the potential for zero occupancy vehicles and all of the challenges we were just hearing around what happens if there's an accident, but with many of the theoretical safety benefits of taking humans out of the loop removed. So given that is actually probably easier to make work, it's worth highlighting that is potentially a more immediate risk that we need to assess the implications of and have a view on.
Yeah. Interesting, thank you. Let me just pick up a couple of climate change questions to finish with. I'm going to come to you, Hirra, first. In terms of the London transport network, do we think and assume it's going to end up being entirely electric in the future? And are there challenges around being prepared for that, if so?
I mean, of course, that would be the ideal, because and that is what we'd be campaigning for. Everything that can be electrified should be electrified, because that is better than fossil fuels. We know that currently there are still, diesel buses being in use. We know all the health impacts and the climate impacts of doing that. We know the costs involved, but we think that the cost of not changing and not shifting are far greater, and therefore, from our perspective, absolutely.
And Thomas, is that what TfL is assuming? I know they've got some hydrogen buses as well, but are you assuming the whole network will be? Yeah,
I mean, certainly we're targeting a zero-emission network. We've got one double-deck hydrogen route in Perivale at the moment. The issue there is actually the hydrogen, not the bus, because it's no good simply moving the problem to the generation of hydrogen and potentially a highly carbon-intensive process, plus just pure availability of green hydrogen. So, we want a zero-emission network. We're neutral as to what that is, but at the moment, all the evidence suggests that electricity is far more likely to be the way that's achieved.
And are there any specific challenges TfL is facing trying to get ready for that, shift to electric?
So the bus network, we've now got just under 1,400 electric buses, which is about 14%. So we have, we're now well into a process. This is not experimentation or trialling anymore. This is now business as usual. We're on track to achieve 2034. We would like to get to 2030. If we can, if we can get funding from government, we will make 2030 happen, we can do it. Probably the biggest challenge is around some of the longest routes and battery capacity. We're doing a trial in Bexley-Heath at the moment of pantograph charging to top up the bus. We're going to be doing another trial of that later this year in Orpington. If those experiments are successful and that technology is used elsewhere, it's used in Switzerland, then that becomes a potential solution to enable electrification to be adopted across the network.
So it's the infrastructure really to move over to all of this. Lovely.
I think the only other bit I'd add is the grid. Especially in West London and especially in the area around Heathrow, we are seeing significant capacity issues with the grid, significant delays in connecting new capacity. Bus garages have never needed significantly large electrical supplies, now they do. And so that is one thing I would flag as a risk.
Yeah, no, I visited bus garages down in Merton and Sutton, transitioned over to this, and my goodness, the power they need and kit they need to get ready for that. Can I just pick up, and I'll start with you, Hirra, finally. We see more and more extreme weather. I mean, it's always, the hottest ever, the wettest ever, whatever, each month it seems. This has an impact on the transport network. We've seen it flooded, we've seen, the heat causing problems with rails and the electricity supply. Are there any examples you're aware of innovations in other cities? Have you any thoughts on that?
One thing I would say is around heat, that we're experiencing the extreme heat already. More and more we're experiencing more than 30-degree heat in London. And therefore, I think the gentleman said we need to use our space efficiently. And at the moment, we have so much space given over to parking space, which we actually need to take out and put trees in. There's so many places where we don't have trees, and the only way where they can go is on the pavement, and of course that causes a problem for people with pushchairs, people in wheelchairs who can't get around. The only space where we can put trees is in the carriageway, and we need to take out some of the parking spaces to be able to do that. Trees will help bring down the temperature in London, and this is a severe health risk at the moment, and it's just going to get worse.
Lovely, thank you for that. Philippe, you've got your hand up. Are there any good examples internationally you could tell us about, please?
Absolutely, and they are of two types. One is on heat, one is on water management and rainfall management and storm surge management. In terms of the likely or the expected uptick of temperatures and the rainfall, a number of cities are already putting in place policies. One of them links to greening of urban space, in particular of making that space serve two purposes: provide green cover, but also be more permeable to rainfall. In that respect, one of the world leaders is Copenhagen. I would certainly look at their bioswale policy, where they try to ensure that any kind of new or intervention on public space, road space, or pavement space leads to increased ability for rainfall to be absorbed, carried away from the hardened space, and at the same time looking at ways to use urban greenery to decrease temperatures. I think that approach to adaptation is one that we see in other cities as well. In Southeast Asia, it's more on the rainfall side. And I would point out that the last thing is one of the things to consider with increased heat is the increased maintenance cost that will require for macadam, for asphalt, and using heavy vehicles on that asphalt, which is a consequence of the increased electrification of fleets. So there's a real risk to manage there. How do we create pavements that are heat resistant? At the same time, we're seeing heavier vehicles use those pavements, those road surfaces.
No, it's very true. We see in London more and more huge ridges in some of the road surfaces. Particularly, I've noticed them at bus stops, and it is to do with the vehicle weight and that extreme heat.
Absolutely, and those are two things that will be getting worse.
Yeah, lovely. Okay, Hirra, you wanted to come back.
I just wanted to come back on that, on the concept of sponge cities that we've seen in Southeast Asia, and that is basically pulling up the tarmac to make more permeable surfaces. And I think there was some recent work pulled out showing, by the time of 2040, if we continue at this rate of climate change, a lot of central London, where we're very, very close to the river, as well as in East London, will just be flooded, and so we've got to act.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank all our guests for attending today. Thank you for answering our questions. It's been very, very interesting, actually. We've just got a few more pieces of business to deal with, but in the meantime, if you wish, you're more than welcome to leave. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much on the guys online. It's been brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, can I ask the committee to note the report and discussion?
Noted.
Can we also delegate authority to me as chairman in consultation with the deputy chair and party group lead members to agree any outputs arising from the meeting?
Agreed.
Thank you. Date of next meeting, the London Assembly's annual meeting due to take place in May 2024 will decide which committees to establish for the 24-25 Assembly year and a timetable of meetings for those committees. So, before my colleagues on the committee leave, I would like to thank our committee clerk team for all the help and support they've given us throughout the year. And we've done really well. We're getting lots of stuff through the door in the last few months, so thank you very much indeed. Can I also say a special thank you to the group leads, namely Sian Berry, who isn't here unfortunately, but I'd like to put on record my thanks to her. Also to Assembly Member Ellie Baker, thank you for your help and support. It's been very enjoyable working with you, enlightening as well. I'd like to also put on record my thanks to two Assembly members. First of all, Nick Rogers, who will be leaving us. Nick, thanks a lot for all your help and support. In fact, you started the year chairing the meeting, and you very graciously handed it over to me. So I think I should thank you for that. But finally, and by no means least, I come to Assembly Member Caroline Pigeon. She's been a member of the Transport Committee since she was first elected in 2008 and has served as chair and deputy chair multiple times. Indeed, throughout the last 8 years when I've been on the Assembly, Caroline and I have either chaired or deputy chaired on numerous occasions. It's been a fantastic working with you, Caroline. And for the last, I think it's 9 months, you've been an immense support and a real brick, and I'm really grateful to you for that. And I wish you all the best going forward. But it's really nice to close with saying, Caroline, thank you so much. So thank you. I close the meeting.
And thank you to you, Chair, as well, for chairing the committee so well this year.
Thank you.
This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.